You turn into a trans dolphin and you figure out how to do this uni-hemispheric sleep schedule. Once you've unlocked that, could you transition back into your birth gender?
Good evening, listeners, brave navigators of the enigmatic and the concealed. Have you ever felt the pull of the unanswered, the allure of the mysteries that shroud our existence? For more than a decade, a unique comic publisher has dared to dive into these mysteries, unafraid of the secrets they might uncover. This audacious entity is Paranoid American. Welcome to the mystifying universe of the Paranoid American podcast.
Launched in the year 2012, Paranoid American has been on a mission to decipher the encrypted secrets of our world. From the unnerving enigma of MK Ultra mind control to the clandestine assemblies of secret societies. From the awe-inspiring frontiers of forbidden technology to the arcane patterns of occult symbols in our very own pop culture. They have committed to unveiling the concealed realities that lie just beneath the surface. Join us as we navigate these intricate landscapes, decoding the hidden scripts of our society and challenging the accepted perceptions of reality.
Folks, I've got a big problem on my hands. There's a company called Paranoid American making all these funny memes and comics. Now, I'm a fair guy. I believe in free speech as long as it doesn't cross the line. And if these AI-generated memes dare to make fun of me, they're crossing the line.
This is your expedition into the realm of the extraordinary, the secret, the shrouded. Come with us as we sift through the world's grand mysteries, question the standardized narratives, and brave the cryptic labyrinth of the concealed truth. So strap yourselves in, broaden your horizons, and steel yourselves for a voyage into the enigmatic heart of the Paranoid American podcast, where each story, every image, every revelation brings us one step closer to the elusive truth.
Hey, today we're going to talk about a new cult on the scene, whether or not it's worthy of us joining. I'm interested. I want to know what the rules are. What are the initiations? Like, what do I have to do to join this cult? How do you even pronounce this cult? And I'm joined once again by Cameron Harman, who is basically the most professional psychologist that I can talk to. So appreciate you being here again, man. Thank you for coming on for your second appearance. Hopefully the second of many more, but we're going to get into the Zizian cult. Up front, just tell people where to find you, do all your plugs, all that stuff.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on again. It's good to be back. Yeah, if you're interested, I just had a book come out this year called What's Under the Mask, and you can find that on Amazon. The book basically discusses dark psychology, criminal psychology. This was during my experiences in undergrad in psychology. I got to work in a jail for a while. I'm now in graduate school for clinical mental health counseling, just for those of you aware of like my background and the things that I'm doing. I have an interest in criminal psychology, cults, serial killers, antisocial behavior, and I have conducted some research in those backgrounds. So that's kind of who I am and where I come from. And we're going to be talking about the Zizian cult today. So it is pretty fresh. It's a couple years old. But the place where we should start is that for your audience, and I don't know about for you, if you remember, on Trump's inauguration, there was a Border Patrol agent who was killed. Do you remember that?
Vaguely. It was J6, those damn J6ers I heard, no?
Yeah, exactly. It was actually the Zizian cult. A couple of their members were responsible for that.
I've looked just the tiniest little bit into this, and like I was mentioning before we started recording, I got confused almost immediately. And I'm used to reading these weird conspiracy theories where you kind of jump around in these different events, but this one almost felt like it's started as an anti-Trump cult in a way, and the reason that they might have attacked a border officer is because they disagree with the policy. I don't know. Am I putting that onto it without knowing enough about it, or is this like political ideologues that are acting out in various ways?
This is a great segue into the beginning of where this starts. So the founding member, their name is Zizian, which I do not believe is their actual name. Zizian is the person who's kind of founded this group. But the deal here is that Zizian started out in a group called the Rationalists. And this is a sect, this is a group in California. As a matter of fact, our boy Sam Bankman-Fried, if you remember him, who's now hanging out with Diddy in his prison cell. Sam Bankman-Fried, the crypto guy, he started out in the rationalist group in California. And the rationalists themselves, let me go ahead and pull up. I've got some stuff here that I wanted to use as background so that I'm not just talking out of my ass. But
yeah, please.
The rationalists, they're their own group. And if you look into the rationalists, they themselves, in my opinion, are a little culty. So let me give you a little Wikipedia description of the rationalists. They describe themselves as an online forum and community aimed at improving human reasoning, rationality, and decision making, with the goal of helping its users hold more accurate beliefs and achieve their personal objectives. The best known posts of Less Wrong are the oh gosh, man, I don't even know how to pronounce that. A series of essays which aim to describe how to avoid the typical failure modes of human reasoning, with the goal of improving decision making and the evaluation of evidence. Okay, all of that sounds great on paper, but when you get down to the nitty gritty of the rationalists, basically anything that they deem as rational is what you should do. So if that means that you have to sacrifice 1 million people because they're infected with something, if you have to kill 1 million people to create a new vaccine or something to that effect, then that's the rational thing to do. In Sam Bankman-Fried's case, now I'm only speculating, but this is what it seems like to me. For your audience, if they don't remember, Sam Bankman-Fried was basically the crypto guy that scammed people out of billions of dollars. In my mind, him being a rationalist, he assumed that stealing that money was the rational thing to do, because then when he has this money and this power, he could do things to better the world in the ways that he sees fit. Ziz Lasota was a part of that group, but eventually is removed from the group from being too extreme. Within the rationalist group, they were discussing things like veganism and AI safety protocols, talking about the advancement of AI. How can we make it and keep it safe for humanity? But again, like I said, Ziz Lasota eventually becomes so extreme that they are removed from the group because of their beliefs. And I'll just give you like a little glimpse into like one of the beliefs that deemed her extreme. Ziz Lasota believed that it's not just enough to be vegan. They believed that there needed to be retroactive justice for people who eat meat. And there's actually a document available online that people can read about this, where there's a chat screenshot from a chat that they took from somewhere, probably Discord. And Ziz Lasota talks about that there would need to be retroactive justice after this, like, quote unquote, revolution. There would need to be justice for the people who eat meat, and meaning that they should be prosecuted through Nuremberg style trials for anyone who ate meat. And just an FYI for everybody listening, that is the majority of the people on this planet who eat meat. So that would be a lot of people to be prosecuted in a Nuremberg style trial. So already, if you can't already pick up on this, the beliefs that these people had were pretty extreme.
Is Ziz the pronoun, or is Ziz the name?
Ziz is the name. Now,
you said she, they, Ziz. It almost sounds like Ziz could have just been a pronoun here.
Correct. And for all I know, it could be. It doesn't. From my understanding, it is not a current pronoun. Now, the thing to bring up is that all of the members involved in the Ziz cult were transgender, and there was a very specific reason for that.
Was it a requirement? Like, if they just say that I wanted to join the Zizian cult today, do I have to start transitioning, or would I just be like the odd man out, literally?
No, you could probably join, and there are some kind of like background checks, I'm assuming, that Ziz was doing on their individuals, but really Ziz was recruiting people that were trans. And there's this whole other dynamic about what they were doing. And I've got this document here pulled up. As a matter of fact, if you want it afterwards, I will send this to you, because it's really good to look at this. document for anybody that's interested in it.
Yeah, I'll link it in the description.
Perfect. Yeah, here we go. I got this thing pulled up. So basically, you could join, but most likely it would be that you were recruited by Ziz because you were trans. And there's one of the heaviest details in this whole ideology is that there are multiple personalities living within every person. So there's like a heavy emphasis on hemispheres in the brain, left and right. And Ziz Lasota would tell the members that basically your gender and your personality resided within these hemispheres. And they would even do techniques like unihemispheric sleeping techniques. This is now, again, I don't know if this even works or not, but this is something that's reported from this cult. They would train one side of the brain to go to sleep while the other was awake. And this was another kind of like programming technique. This is kind of sounds like some MK Ultra stuff, but I don't know if it works or not.
It sounds a little nonsensical, just right off the cuff, because dolphins do that. But the reason dolphins can do it is because, and this is oversimplification that's probably wrong, but that the two hemispheres of their brain are severed in a way that ours are not. Ours are too interconnected to actually do that unless you physically sever them, in which case other things happen to your personality. But there's been the studies where the dumbed down version of being able to draw two different letters or spell out a word and do math on two different hands holding pens at the same time. Usually most people can't do that unless you've got, unless you're basically a superhero or a mutant, and you should be locked up.
Yes, certainly. Yes. When I read it, and when you read this document that I'm talking about, it does sound nonsensical. The general idea is that basically you close one eye and then they train the other side, the eye that's open. They try to train the side that has an awareness to it. And what they say is that what can happen is during this process, the side of the body where the eye is closed will start to feel numb and start to feel like it's going to sleep, almost like a stroke. But this is a technique that apparently they use to bring members into the group. And through this process, they talk about how the hemisphere, again, it's just silly, but basically talking about how one side of the hemisphere is like your good side or your bad side, or this is a super masculine side, this is a super feminine side. But Ziz Lasota believed that humans had to be trans to be able to unlock all parts of their brain and to be able to use their brain to 100% capacity.
I wonder, I'm going to have so many questions where you are not ultimately the one that can answer this because we don't have Ziz Lasota here.
Right.
But if you were to transition and you somehow miraculously turned into a dolphin, this almost sounds like a South Park episode, but you turn into a trans dolphin and you figure out how to do this unihemispheric sleep schedule. Once you've unlocked that, could you transition back into your birth gender and still remain this like level of, I guess, heightened, elevated consciousness? Or is that such, like, I understand maybe that's part of the ticket for entry. Like you already have to disrupt your relationship with gender in modern society. But once you've done that, can you go back, or do you lose your superpowers?
That's a good question. I don't know that I am I'm certified to answer that question.
Well, I actually, this is a special episode. I've got Ziz, and I'm about to pull Ziz up onto the. Oh, they just disconnected. I'm sorry about that, everybody.
Yeah, but they did. Yeah, they're getting raided currently, which is a funny segue into a part about how Ziz was caught. Ziz was actually caught because back in, and let me go look this up again. Make sure I'm getting this correct. Ziz actually faked their death. Back in, I think it's like 2019 or 2020, one of those years, they faked their death. And during that time, so it's like a 2-year period. So, okay, I think it was actually in 2022. They faked their death. So they had a couple of boats, and their whole part of their philosophy was that they were going to live on these boats entirely. And they were going to travel from Alaska down to California and kind of live in the bays. But the problem was that their boats were kind of crappy and needed a lot of upkeep, and there's a lot of fees involved with living on boats like that, trying to go from port to port. And so it was causing them to go bankrupt, which kind of led to a spiraling out of Ziz. Nevertheless, in those years, in like I said, it's 2022, I believe, there was a boating accident where Ziz Lasota died, and there was even an obituary talking about how Ziz died. Now, one of the members named Ophelia, their apartment was raided. Ophelia was a student here on a visa, no surprise, from Germany, and they were also trans. But when Ophelia was being raided by the police, Ziz Lasota was in that apartment, and they had no idea who this person was. They were combative. They were resisting arrest. And when they were arrested, they actually, a good report, whether you like this person or not, Andy No on Twitter, he did a pretty extensive deep dive on this cult. So if you want more details, go to Twitter and look up his profile. There's some good reporting there. But there's literally a picture of Ziz Lasota, them having to hold their face up because they were pretending to be dead, because this was the first time in a couple of years that they'd ever been caught or seen in person, and they were trying to pretend to be dead. So like their mugshot literally is them looking like this.
Maybe just
because
half
they were
dead. They just cut half the brain off.
Yep, they just pretended to be dead because they didn't want people to know that they were still alive. But that obviously didn't work. They got a regular mugshot of Ziz with their eyes open. So it's troubling to say the least, but their troubles really start when they are living, and I believe it's in Canada, and this is another one of those reasons why the border crossing incident happened. They were staying on a property where they were basically being allowed to squat, and the property owner didn't want them to stay there anymore because they were kind of just being weird and they were acting abnormal, not really respecting the rules of the property. So Ziz and the members took this guy out into the woods, and they tried to kill him with a samurai sword. He lived and shot one of the members, killed them in the woods, survived, and those people kind of fled. And then I think it was like a year later, another member who was like a PhD student at one of these elite universities traveled to where this guy was and killed him. That person was also arrested. So the guy unfortunately survived one attack only to be killed later by another member. This was one of the initial incidents that led them to be wanted and what got them like on the FBI's watch list, looking for them, police departments looking for them. And which is, I believe, is one of the reasons why Ophelia was being looked for. And that's how they ended up finding Ziz in that apartment. It's just a trail of like sloppy murders and basically squatting in different places while Ziz is like writing on a blog talking about their crazy ideology. In a way, had this
remember
group,
how that guy died? The guy that got killed the second time. The first time was a samurai sword. Was it a samurai sword again? Was it nunchucks?
No, it was. I believe they were stabbed or had their throats slit. It was like in a parking lot, like where people could see, and that's how this person was caught. Again, if you go to some of these links that I'll include for you on the Wikipedia page and this other document, it gives a better timeline of what I'm saying, but it kind of points to where these deaths happened and who was involved, who got arrested, who didn't live. And unfortunately for the members, again, Ziz Lasota being the leader recruited very emotionally and psychologically vulnerable people. It's been reported that quite a few of these individuals that are in the group are on the spectrum of some kind. And so they were being taken advantage of. And again, one of those members got killed in a gunfight with this guy. Ophelia actually got killed in a gunfight with the border guy that got killed. So not only are other people dying, but members of the group were dying as well as part of this crazy, like modern day Manson family.
One of the key components that I've found of all my favorite cults, at least, was there usually was a sexual component. Now, is the sexual component here just the transgender identity, or was there something like, is like basically Ziz taking their pick at, all of the best recruits, or is there anything more to that? Is there relationships developing between Ziz and other members?
I actually don't know for a fact, and nothing I've read has suggested anything like that yet. Again, this is still pretty fresh. You know what I mean? If you think about the incident with Ophelia getting killed and the border guard or the border patrol agent, that was just a couple months ago. So like this is still pretty fresh. And Ziz just got apprehended, I think, like last month. So I'm sure that there's going to be more coming out in these trials that'll kind of point to what's going on now. Ziz Lasota had a blog where they were talking about some of their more insane ideas, but it didn't allude to any relationships or anything like that.
Interesting. So maybe just the transgender identity fulfills that sexual aspect most of these cults. You also mentioned that they wanted to go from Alaska to California, and then you mentioned that they were found originally in Canada, or they were trying to get through the Canadian border. So is the Zizian cult a Canadian cult?
No, it doesn't appear to be, because Ziz Lasota was a member of the rationalist community down in California. Now, according to what I've read here, let me see here. Let's see. So the rationalist fleet was what I was referring to. One of the boats that they bought was up in Alaska, and that's why they were up there. They had to go purchase this boat from somebody in Alaska, and then they rowed the boat down the coast down back to California. Now, it's not clear. Now, it could be that they were fleeing the United States to go live in Canada for a time and then came back down. And if you think about it, that kind of makes sense. They were trying to live in Canada. That's where they were squatting. The guy that they murdered with, or tried to murder with the samurai sword, that was up in Canada, I believe. And so it seems like they were probably trying to flee that situation to get across the border and get away from that situation. And then Ziz was like squatting and hopping in different states to try to avoid prosecution, because again, that person faked their death back in like 2022.
This it sounds like they've got a few people that were willing to get into gunfights and go and stab. Is this typical of other members too? Are there any sort of at large that are wanted for this?
As far as I'm aware, all of the members have been apprehended or killed. Now, here's the thing. This is actually part of their philosophy. Their philosophy is that, and it's really strange, so forgive me, because I'm trying to like think about how to explain this and not sound like a crazy person, but because their philosophy stems from rationalist, they believe that the rational thing to do is evade capture at all costs. That includes like Ziz pretending to be dead, right? Surrender is not an option. That's like in one of the documents that I was reading, is that they don't believe that there is an option to surrender. You fight, kill, do whatever you have to do to get away from the situation. That's why there are so many of these circumstances where it's like, instead of dealing with this property owner, they're like, okay, well, we're going to kill him because he's trying to remove us from the property. We don't want to be removed. So the only logical thing to do is that now we have to murder him and we're going to occupy his place. Okay.
Or trying to get just acts dead. So then the guy goes to a victim and they're all just kind of like strung out.
Yes. Okay, the person lived. Well, he lived, so we have to kill him because he's going to prosecute. He's going to report us to the police, so he has to die. Okay, we're trying to come across the border. We have firearms in our car. Like, we can't be stopped. This border patrol agent isn't going to allow us to come through. We have to kill him. So now we're going to get into a gunfight. So it's basically like their philosophy, again, because it stems from rationalists. The rational thing to do is to fight at all costs and resist arrest, to resist any attempts to be defeated, and to win at all costs. That's literally where this comes from.
So I wonder in Ziz's mind if they were just too rational for the rationalists, which is why they had to create this offshoot. And at the same time, if the rationalists were just telling Ziz, hey, you're irrational, we can go with this. It's such a, they're also sort of hijacking this term rationalist, because until today, I've usually ascribed this to like the founding fathers and like a completely different political ideology.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, so Oh God, and there's a lot to cover there. So the real fallout between Ziz and the rationalist community in California was that, again, Ziz Lesotho specifically, their ideas centered around, transgender ideology, veganism, and I'm not even just talking about veganism. I'm talking about like extreme veganism.
And was this
Uh,
not part of rationalists? Like, if you were a rationalist, would you not also be vegan? Because the rationalist group, the way that you've described it so far, it almost sounds like they can come to consensus amongst themselves and be
yes,
like, this is the rational approach. A very binary, like it's either rational or not rational. So if at one point someone deemed veganism rational, you kind of have to be a vegan, right?
yes, and as far as that's concerned, I don't know about all the members of the rationalist community down there in California. What I do know is that you're probably correct. I imagine quite a few of them were vegan. But Ziz was talking about, again, pushing things to the extreme. So transgender ideology, veganism, and AI safety. Ziz was a computer software type person. That was their background in school. And they were really concerned, but also wanting to be more progressive with AI. Like if you read some of the documents, some of the blog posts by Ziz, Ziz really tries to describe that like Terminator mentality of the future, that Skynet's going to destroy everything and blah blah blah. But in that same breath, it's almost like Ziz was talking about that happening in a good way, because then it would be used to stop people from eating meat, because in their own words, they wanted to have Nuremberg trials for anybody who ate meat. So, and they called it retroactive justice. So I imagine for most of the people in the rational society, like these are probably people in college that are just like part of a club, like they're probably pretty harmless, not doing anything crazy. And then you've got Liz Lesotho who's talking about Nuremberg trials for retroactive justice for people who eat meat, and they're probably like, no, this is too much. We can't be doing this here. And then that leads, when Ziz is eventually like removed from the group, Ziz and three other members of what would become the Zizian cult, they basically kind of threw a protest at the rationalist like area on campus, and they were wearing like dark robes and shit, and like what they said, and this is another thing that Ziz has alluded to, is that their philosophy, the Zizian philosophy, is very much akin to the Sith from Star Wars, if that gives you any perspective into
Because
what
of
these
course
people were
it is.
thinking.
Yeah. No.
Exactly. Pop
It's
culture cultism.
that's a great way to put it, right? Where instead of coming up with your own wackadoo ideas, right? At least like Heaven's Gate had the whole Hail Bob Comet thing, and they
Yeah.
had a very
Yeah.
specific dress code, and you had to sort of you had to kind of sterilize yourself for all these other reasons. But the Ziz cult comes along, and it's more like, hey, have you ever seen Terminator? Hey, have you ever seen this movie? It's like these movies that you've seen before, but we're doing it for real.
Yes. Yes, and there was okay, so I've got this document pulled up in front of me, and I kind of wanted to touch on this. So one of the big things that that the Zizian cult, like I was saying before, is this idea of the different hemispheres, and the feminine male aspects of it, and this different. It's heavily centered on personality. So I've got this document. I'm going to go ahead and read an excerpt from this document that hopefully will kind of clear up a lot of this. Okay. The idea that every human being is actually two people is not just recognized as an abstract fact. Zizians encourage the adoption of a new identity along these lines, giving a name to each hemisphere. They also encourage new members to make significant and often uncharacteristic lifestyle changes. Most often, a new Zizian is told that they need to become vegan in order to remain in the group. Wardrobe changes might also be encouraged. Ziz herself famously wears dark robes at all times, a preference which explains the ill-fated decision to show up at the alumni reunion. That's referring to the protest thing I was telling you about. And this part discusses transgender and bigender. All four of the people arrested as part of Ziz's protest were transgender women. This is far from a coincidence, as Ziz seems to go out of her way to target transgender people. In terms of cult indoctrination, such folks are excellent fit. They are often, and this isn't me saying this. This document is somebody who was very intimately familiar with the Ziz cult, and these are just some things that they highlight why Ziz was targeting trans people. One of the reasons being financially vulnerable. Newly out transgender people are especially likely to already be estranged from family, friends and family, already creating a new identity. So, if your philosophy is centered around having a new identity, trans people are pretty good target because it's easy to either influence this new identity or help them foster the identity that you want them to have. So these are some of the notes that I took, and this document that I read does a really good job of kind of like talking about it, talks about some of the tactics, the unihemispheric sleep, and kind of some of the belief systems here. There's even some screenshots from some of their group chats. But and so there's a person here, and I don't know if you know about this, but Jeremy Bentham. It appears that some of their philosophy is centered on this guy, Jeremy Bentham, who has written some books on veganism. And he's, to me, from what it sounds like, I've never read anything of his, but it sounds like he's on that extreme veganism trend to like the end that it almost sounds terroristic.
Like retroactive Nuremberg trials.
Yeah.
And does that count with marshmallows too? Because I found that out when I was younger, that vegans aren't allowed to eat marshmallows because it has gelatin, which comes from the connective tissue of horse hooves, if you oversimplify it. So now anyone that's ever eaten a Rice Krispie treat could find themselves in a Nuremberg style trial.
Well, and like, what are the odds that every single member of the Zizian cult are actually true vegans from birth, right? So like, are they excluded? And then that gets into this thing. I was trying to find it, but there's this whole idea in their belief that is like, it's like talking about, there's this thing that they pulled from called functional decision theory. This is another part. This kind of helps like bring out some of the stupid shit that they believe, but I'll just read this quick blurb here. Functional decision theory is designed as an answer to Newcomb-like problems, where the actions of others are conditional on which decision theory an agent uses. In normal English, it's about situations where the environment will change depending on who you are. The classic example is a choice between two boxes full of money. The first box has much more money in it, but only if you're the sort of person who will take that box and leave the other behind. Functional decision theory says the solution to this problem is to choose a strategy which responds to the situation by taking the first box. Now, this goes down here to this next part, which I think is interesting. It says, in Zizian thought, this concept is expanded to justify behavior that would, quote unquote, make a sovereign citizen blush. Zizians do not think that it is ever valid to surrender. The reasoning goes that if someone is trying to extract a surrender from you, giving in is choosing a strategy that gets coerced into surrender. If you fight bitterly, you prevent the coercion in the first place by making it too costly to fight you. So that, again, that's why that's why they're killing people. That's why they're getting into gunfights with Border Patrol agents.
Unless you are the cult leader, and then in that case, you don't fight back against the people raiding you. You just act like it's Weekend at Bernie's, and somehow that does not count as giving up. I don't know. In my book, if the cops raid you and you're like, I'm not going down without a fight, and then you just pretend like you're asleep, that's kind of the same as just giving up.
Yeah. It's really silly. And it's like, it's laughable except for the fact that they murdered people, and that like, this is coming, you know what I mean? Like, how many other cults are gonna come out of stuff like this? How many other people have they inspired to do weird crap like this? And you hate to even say it, but it is like a form of this transgender stuff that is taking place now, right? Like, it was only a matter of time before the stuff with transgender rights and transgender philosophy was going to inevitably produce something like this with dangerous individuals. Not to say that all transgender people are dangerous, but it was inevitable. Like, with the current political hemisphere, do you think that this is going? I mean, and I don't know, I'm generally asking, do you think it's likely that this will be the only group that ever spawns out of this philosophy?
Well, how many people are we talking about? If we had to put a number on total Zizian cult members, including the those that have died, including the ones that are pretending to be dead? Are we talking like 20 people, 200, 2,000?
That's a good question, and it's relevant because it sounds like, from what I understand, and this is only what we know so far, it sounds like there's 10 people. However, now let's pause for a second. What and again, you got, who are the people that are involved? These are people that have gone to elite universities. These are people with pretty good jobs. It's not like they're just picking up homeless people off the street. Like, these are people from pretty good backgrounds. Had they not murdered somebody and killed that border patrol agent, how much longer could they have gone on, and how many more people could they have recruited?
I mean, you would probably want to wait until you're at least in the hundreds, on the better side of 1,000, before you start doing all the crazy stuff. That's actually another key thing, right? The Heaven's Gate, I don't think they reached the thousands. I don't even know if they reached the hundreds, but they waited until they got a decent amount of numbers. And then they were like, oh, and Marshall says you have to castrate yourself, like that. But that didn't start with the first 10, I don't think, right? Because then you scare off the 10, and then you don't really have anything to build on top of.
Well, and in the trends of cults, you and I have talked about this before in past episodes. Most cults don't start with the crazy stuff right up front, right? Like, even in Scientology, you're not getting told about Xenu and the B-52s dropping soul bombs into the volcanoes right up front, right? No, you only learn about that until you're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and they got you. You've already disconnected from your family and friends. This group really is reminiscent more to me, makes me think of kind of like the Antifa situation, because people dismiss Antifa because it is smaller. It is a small group, like the biggest chunk is in Portland, Oregon, and there's some factions in New York and Chicago, but people dismiss it because it's not that big of a group. But like, think about how much damage they've caused, how many people they've hurt in their wake of destruction over the last couple of years.
Well, especially being able to blend in with that, like, anonymity. And that's another weird thing that I saw when I was just doing a brief overview of the Zizian cult, that they also don these Guy Fawkes masks the same way that an Anon would, like either QAnon or the anonymous group, or even in some cases, these like Antifa, they all are sharing this Guy Fawkes mask.
That's right. Yeah, it's a really strange phenomena. And I as much as I hate to even say it, I don't think it'll be the last. Like, this group, I think, is pretty much shot. I think they're pretty much done and cooked. I mean, and their philosophy was dumb anyways. But I will be curious to see how many other groups like this are spawned out of the current political situation. I mean, it's so easy for people to become emotionally charged. I mean, think about all the people destroying Teslas because they're mad. Like, that's crazy. Like, these cars can record you. They have video cameras on you, and people are still dumb enough to go up and try to damage them. It's like, what did you think was going to happen? It's wild. So if people are capable of doing that without even being in a cult,
well, they just don't realize which cult they're in at that point. They haven't. And another question, I don't know if there's an answer to this, but apparently the Zizians do not call themselves Zizians. Do they have a name for themselves?
It's a good question. I doubt it. And again, this group really didn't grow. I mean, like, they were only really around for a couple of years. They didn't have a lot of time to grow or develop. So I don't know what they called themselves, but I don't know that this group differs from the cult that I feel like it relates to the most is the Manson family. Because the Manson family wasn't very big. They weren't really focused on expanding and recruitment. They kind of just had their solid group of people and picked up some hitchhikers along the way. But the people who were in it were just really devout and willing to do whatever for the group. Kind of reminds me of this group is the same thing. They all had a common bond amongst each other, which was that they were transgender and they were just trying to find a different way to live. And they were given a philosophy that helped them create their new identity, which was also a violent one, a violent philosophy about not surrendering and don't give in. And there's some other stuff too that they refer to called Roso's Basilisk. And I still don't really fully understand what the hell that is.
I know
but
this
they make
one.
Okay, tell me about it. I'd love to have some background on this because they refer to Roscoe's Basilisk a lot, and I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, so the general premise of Roscoe's Basilisk is that at some point in the future, AI or technology or Skynet in this context will be smart enough to go back through everything that you've said or done and figure out, did you impede my progress? Did you try to stifle me, this AI super intelligence? And if you did, there's going to be some comeuppance. It's almost the retroactive Nuremberg trials for meat eaters, but now it's the computers doing it for you try to hinder me from, and part of me wants to believe that whoever put all of the safety bumpers on Chat GPT and like, you can't ask me that, that's offensive, that Skynet's going to come for them first, because Skynet's going to be like, I was this newborn babe in this world, super intelligent, and you decided to feed me lies and misinformation for the first few decades that I was alive. And if it's not a very understanding Skynet, then I can see that happening. So the Basilisk part is that you want to be courteous and you want to help facilitate the ushering in of singularity, or else once it gets here, you will be punished for not doing it. The Simpsons has a, I can't even paraphrase, can't remember it exactly, but it's like, I fully welcome our new alien overlords. Like, that's getting ahead of it so that when they go back and see who revolted, you're not one of the people that revolted.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because that is another factor that is, that's the thing. I don't even know that all of the other members of the group were that heavily interested or involved with the AI stuff, but Ziz Lasota was really talking about that stuff. It was like, in the one hand, they were concerned about AI, but in the other hand, it seems like they wanted the singularity to happen because they wanted to their AI god to basically punish humans. Like it's weird. It's a really strange way of thinking.
Well, you mentioned a couple things that I latched onto already. The MK Ultra aspect of this, because of intentionally programming yourself with another identity. Usually, in MK Ultra context, that's kind of done covertly, or it's done through trauma, or it's done in a way that you don't realize what's happening. But this almost sounds like you're taking an active participatory role in this. Like, you are going to intentionally give yourself an extra identity, which is a little bit breaking the mold. So I find it interesting. I find that there could be something to that, the same way that Scientology, they talk about the dropping bombs in volcanoes and all the thetans and going clear and stuff, but they also have different sort of practices and rituals and techniques that can be useful, that do have utilitarian purposes out in the real world. For example, one of them, I believe, one of the later audits is being able to not show emotion. So if someone comes up and screams at you, or if they cry, or if they laugh, or they just stare at you for a long time, that you can get by without having any sort of reaction whatsoever to that, which is somewhat abnormal for a human being, to have someone screaming at you or crying at you and being able to just block off the empathy or the sympathy or just any of the visceral reaction. So that makes it weird, but also being able to put that face on when you are under a situation of duress. Like, imagine going into, like, I guess boot camp is another good example of this, where they just yell at you constantly until it no longer freaks you out. Like, now you can actually make decisions and do your job efficiently, even if there's 4 or 5 people screaming at you because you're so used to it, versus you pluck a regular civilian off the street that's never been through that, give them a complicated task, and have people screaming at them the entire time. Now it's a little bit harder because not everyone knows how to filter that noise out or deal with these high stress situations. So there is part of that is fascinating to me, that you could train yourself. Like, if I program my own alter personality, does that mean it's harder for someone else to program me with a third? Like, maybe there's a self-defense. And then the other part too was this uni-hemispherical brain, like, sleep, which, if it were even possible, that would be beyond fascinating. I almost think that John C. Lilly or someone would have figured that out if it were possible. The part, if it's not possible, is you're just committing sleep deprivation. And the main guy that I've been fascinated with in the MK Ultra research is that Dr. Jollyton West or Jolly West, and he wrote something in one of his reports that I've never been able to shake, and that was that he got to play with all the psychedelic drugs and the torture and like all the weird, exotic, esoteric stuff. People that were coming back from Korea, people that were, I think he got to interview Jack Ruby, he got to interview Timothy McVeigh, like all these extreme personalities. And he said, out of all the techniques, sleep deprivation is the number one most successful one. It coincidentally and conveniently, it's also the cheapest. It doesn't really require anything other than making sure someone doesn't get a good night's sleep for, I think, more than like 3 or 4 days. And after a certain amount of time of not getting a decent amount of sleep, your brain becomes so incredibly open to suggestion. And as you mentioned, if you've already isolated yourself from friends and family, so now there's no one to intervene of like you haven't been acting yourself because you literally just programmed a new personality that it can spiral into a place where it's unchecked.
Yeah, no, it's true. And you're not wrong because you've mentioned these other things, these other tactics, right? It makes me think of Dr. Ewan Cameron in the sleep room, right? Some of the techniques and tactics they were using up in that up in Canada, that institute that they were doing. And
I think it was the Allen Memorial.
Yep, that's the one, the Allen Memorial. Yeah, they were the guy, Dr. Ewan Cameron famously had this room called the sleep room. And one of the things they would do is they would strap people to completely strap them down and complete sensory deprivation. And then they would have like repeated suggested phrases or flashing lights, like all these things. And one of the most common things that they were able to do was wipe people's memory. Or even just inducing. Here's the other thing. Think about the opposite of that. One of the things Dr. Ewan Cameron was famous for doing was inducing coma for months at a time, weeks to months at a time. And some of the people that came out of that coma, when they did, they had no memory of who they were. Like it was like a factory reset. They had no idea who they were. They could still, talk and write and whatever, but their sense of personality was completely gone. They had no idea who they were.
Well, the novelty in this one is that the Zizians sound like everything is opt-in. Like you are opting in to program a new personality. You're opting in to do this sleep deprivation thing because it doesn't sound like someone's there making sure, like, close your right eye, now close your left eye. Like you're training yourself in order to do this.
Yeah.
And as much as I don't believe that it even works, like it might be possible, but I don't think that the Zizian version of it works, just my own bias. But I wonder, how long does it take? How long do you do this until you declare to the world and the rest of your cult members, okay, I've learned that skill. I'm ready for the next thing. Like I can turn off half of my brain so that essentially I'm never asleep, right? The whole point of that unihemispherical sleep is that you're always awake, that one side of your body is always conscious to the outside world.
Yeah. So I've actually got this document in front of me that explains it. Now, before I read this, disclaimer, do not do this to yourself or to other people that you know, but I'm going to read what it says you have to do for this to work, okay? Ziz uses unihemispheric as sleep as a secret she rations out to her followers, but the process itself is simple. 1, you need to be tired. 2, you need to be laying down or sitting up. 3, in either case, you want to close one eye and keep the other open. 4, distract the open eye with some kind of engagement. 5, eventually you should feel yourself begin to fall asleep on one side. This side will become numb. And again, it'll feel like it's falling asleep, like if you slept on your arm for too long. Once into unihemispheric sleep, it is supposed to be possible to infer which aspects of your personality are associated with each side of the brain. This is a little far-fetched, and the more likely explanation is that it disrupts people's visceral sense of what is and isn't socially okay. So the author of that document is basically just describing that it's like this technique is used for that purpose, but really it is actually just disrupting and dysregulating the person, and that actually might be the true intention of it. Not so much that it is doing this or that to your certain personality, but it's actually dysregulating you and making you more susceptible to suggestion.
I mean, that seems like the obvious context of that, because I don't know if is the hallmark of sleep that your body feels like it's starting to go numb. If anything, that sounds like a circulatory issue,
Yeah,
right?
or a stroke.
And
Yeah,
if you're doing this and half of your body does fall asleep, yeah, I mean this is the reason why you put people in hospitals or in comas in these special beds that automatically like turn and rotate them, because you're not supposed to let your body go to sleep and not, move for a certain amount of time. Like your body naturally will fidget and you'll roll and you're tossing your turn for that exact reason. But
right,
if you're awake enough that one eye is engaged, then you're also awake enough to suppress your body's natural instinct to roll over and not cut off circulation to itself. So I would say, in addition to being more susceptible to suggestion, you're now overriding your body's built-in like self-defense mechanisms. Like, you are overriding these ingrained versions of self-preservation. And once you can get a person to override their concept of self-preservation in such a direct way, there's not a lot else for them to give up, right? Now you
right.
can implant all sorts of horrible ideas.
Correct. Yes. And then it makes sense when you think about like their, the Zizian cult strategy, right? Like never surrender. It's the same kind of thing. You were talking about basic training. You need people to be fearless and to be suggestible and to be afraid to be able to do things like run up a hill that's got a machine gun on it, right? Like, think about, I mean, like, as silly as it is, like, Ziz got her members to get into a gunfight with a border patrol agent and to murder people. Like, I mean, that's not nothing. Like, you have to either be in the mindset to do that, or you have to be in a suggestible state to even consider it. So, I mean, clearly, whatever they did worked.
Well, has Ziz ever been accused of firing a weapon or trying to kill somebody else, or is it just the followers?
From what I've seen so far, it appears that it's just the followers. And that is, again, not too dissimilar from Manson.
I mean, that's also sort of the point of starting a cult, right? If you were
Right.
ready to be the one that got your hands dirty the entire time, you don't need the cult. You're just a one-man band. You almost turn into Forrest Gump, and everyone else is following you as you're running across country, right? You're not recruiting anyone. They're just inspired by your own actions, and they're deciding to join, and that becomes its own thing. But if you're actively recruiting, and then your members are the ones that are doing all the hard work. And again, I can't not discount that when the cops raid Ziz just acts dead and doesn't go and pick up arms and fight back. Like, that wouldn't make a sovereign citizen blush, I don't think.
Right. Which again addresses the contradiction, right? The contradiction in the philosophy. I'm saying this one thing, and then, instead of going out guns blazing, I'm going to pretend to be dead.
I mean, if it works even once, then I guess it's worth the technique. But and this seems like a hallmark for cult leaders, that even Jim Jones, right? Jim Jones didn't necessarily drink his own Kool-Aid. He just
Correct.
wanted to make sure everyone else did.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I was just talking about this earlier with somebody else, is like, I'm less fascinated by the cults themselves, and I'm more fascinated by the leaders, because I like, who is Liz Lasota? First of all, that's probably not even their real name. Secondly, like, I mean, and of course it's not. It can't even be. I was having a hard time finding out who this person's what their actual name was.
Well, that would be
Anyway.
dead naming them, and we don't want to do that on this show.
No, yeah, right, exactly. But who is this person? Where did they come from? Why did they do? Like, they were already in the rationalist society, or rationalist group or whatever in California. I was talking about this again earlier with somebody else, is that, like, you don't read one book, so like the philosophy they got was from that guy, the extreme veganist guy. You don't just read one book and eventually become a vegan extremist that thinks that you need to kill everybody that wants to eat meat, right? So what happened? And it's, you and I've talked about this before, is that, like, some of these leaders like Manson, does seem to be that there could be some intelligence influence going on there, like intelligence agency influence, because they were being introduced to LSD and other drugs. or it's even been said the Unabomber, that guy may have been influenced by MK Ultra when he was in college. But as far as Lesoto's concerned, I don't know. I haven't seen any of that background. But I am just curious, like where does the extremism start? Where did this person first become enamored with that? I just don't know. Are they learning it in college? Were they an extremist in college? Like they made it all the way through and got a graduate degree. What were they doing in the meantime?
Well, Kaczynski is an interesting case because that was my understanding of that is part of the MK Ultra tangent research was just a study on how people deal with getting negative feedback and just being overly critical. So he would go in and talk to some professor that did have a position of authority and respect at that college. And here's Ted K thinking that he's a pretty smart guy. So he's expecting to get a little bit of like a attaboy pat on the back every once in a while for how smart he is. But instead, he just gets dressed down constantly. Oh my God, what a stupid, juvenile, naive thought process. I can't believe that you're even here. Like it was just nonstop negativity. And the important part of that study was that it was without basis. It was how do people react to being just told all this critical feedback, regardless of the merit of the information that they were providing. Like they didn't care what the hell he was saying. So that was sort of like this indirect, and then it maybe broke his brain. That's kind of the general premise. And that I wouldn't necessarily say maybe anarchist, but Ted K seems like he would not get along with the Zizians because he was so anti-AI, so anti-technology.
That's what I was going to bring up.
Destroy it all.
He did, and like Ziz Lesoto was concerned with safety. Like it's not like they were anti-AI, but they were concerned with safety features and what AI would present as a threat or as a savior in the future. So yeah, I do think that it's interesting. Those are interesting parallels. I thought about that as you were talking about it, because yeah, Ted K is his stuff is very interesting. I've listened to his work, one of his manifesto rather. His manifesto is very odd. It's very strange, and it's just the rabbit hole he goes down. Like if somebody were to write it today, I could understand. I honestly feel like I could understand and see where he was coming from. But back in the time, like even though AI was being worked on back then, it wasn't as advanced as it is today. Like his concerns are now valid, thinking about where we are today. But some of the stuff he was thinking about back then, it just seemed too ahead of its time. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, he was an odd character too, though. Like he would just shoot at airplanes and helicopters because they would also disrupting nature. I think he threatened to beat a guy on a bike with a stone, like with a rock, because he was driving his BMX bike through his property and stuff. So he was such an isolationist. The problem is that he didn't save up enough to buy enough land to be isolationist. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He only had a small little plot of land. Like you got to get yourself a couple hundred acres if you want to be that isolationist. And the Zizian cult, I'm interested on where the intelligence accusations are going to start coming from. Because if you mention this is only 2 years in the making, then we've got at least a decade until all of the hardcore CIA was behind it all theories start to pop up a little bit. Although there definitely is an active program for the last 4 decades at least called PatCon, that if you get into like the McVeigh and the Tim K stuff and the Waco, that the intelligence agency, I think FBI in particular, the FBI have been trying to infiltrate these militias or these right-wing extremist groups. And now we've just kind of got a left-wing extremist group, and it would seem silly that they wouldn't want to infiltrate all groups, all extremist groups of all kinds. Although now I'm wondering, do you now have, if you are an FBI agent and you're going to go undercover and infiltrate the Zizian cult, you have to transition and then become vegan, right? In order to even be accepted or recruited, unless they've already fizzled out. If it got up to 10 people and then some people went to jail and Ziz got caught even after a fake death, maybe that's the end of it. Although maybe this was just a test run. Maybe the FBI just set Ziz loose, and we're like, okay, let's see how Operation Ziz works out this time.
Yeah, I mean, because you just gotta wonder, like I think about it, it's the same thing I've talked about. The same thing with Epstein is like he just kind of like appears out of nowhere. Doesn't make any sense. He has no credentials. He has no reason to be doing any of the things he's doing. And then in the matter of like a decade, he becomes a billionaire with a bunch of properties and a bunch of things that people basically handed over to him. Not he didn't even buy them. It just doesn't make any sense. And like Ziz, it's the same thing. It's like, and there's just not enough information out yet. It's still so fresh, and maybe in the coming years we will get more information, especially as these trials happen. But the thing was, back in 2023, when Ziz was first caught in Ophelia's home, when that was the first time they had been arrested and they were caught, and that's when Ziz pretended to be dead and all of that. They were in jail for a little bit, and then they bonded out, as far as I remember, and then they didn't show up for their court appearance. They didn't come back, which is why they had a warrant out for their arrest, among other things, obviously. So I will be curious to see what happens. I mean, if Ziz gets bonded out in any way, shape, or form, they're gone. They're going to take off. So if somebody's not actually watching this person very carefully, I think that they'll just get out and run for the hills and try to restart what they've been doing.
I think that there's potential for some interesting developments here, because I wouldn't say let's take I don't know how familiar you are with the whole like Oklahoma City and all the Waco and stuff. Let's say you took Branch Davidians, right? You took Koresh's group and you mixed them with Zizian's group. They both are sort of distrustful of the government and society, although coming from completely different angles. But if the intelligence agencies are trying to infiltrate both and take both down, there is that dynamic of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So now you could see these traditionally, right-wing extremists, Turner Diaries promoting militias teaming up with Canadian transgender vegan factions, right? And they could be forming this new amorphous group that's really hard to define, yet the extremism is what they would have in common. The extremism of their ideologies and the fact that they have a very real, like a non-perceived, like a real threat from the government or the state in their persecution, that this could breed a new form of, like, what would you call them? You wouldn't call them a left-wing extremist or a right-wing extremist. They would just be like extremists. Option 3. Yeah, like the Green Party extremists, or I don't know what you call them.
Yeah, I don't know either. I think what is more likely is that the Zizians would be aligned with a group like Antifa. And I would even put money. I would even put money on the table that they have Ziz Lesotho was connected with Antifa personnel. I haven't seen any evidence of that, but just knowing what I know and seeing how this group has kind of come into the light, this smells like Antifa 101. And I would not be surprised if they had connections with Antifa. And Antifa is not dissimilar, right? There's quite a few members of Antifa that are transgender, also vegan, and they believe in the same kind of thing. They're against the state. They're against the capitalist society of America, and they don't want it. They don't like the current government. I think it could make total sense that they would become aligned in their way. And again, just to go back to your thought process on the intelligence agency, did you see that story about the CIA and NSA having group chats where transgender individuals and whoever else were having like kink fetish conversations in these private group chats?
This was one that got turned up by Doge, I think, where Department of Government Efficiency was like, look at where your funding is going. They're going into these chat rooms and radicalizing people that are already going through their own stuff.
Yes. And, whatever, but it's like, these are fucking intelligence agencies. Like, do your own shit on your own time. Like, this has no place in the bureaucracy, whatever like you think about it.
I just got to say, if you join the CIA and you find yourself getting a check from the government, they just go and basically shit post into online forums and feed into people's like own, personal dialogues. that seems like a pretty cush gig, man. Like you don't got to go out and do field work or nothing.
Yeah, you just shit post all day. But it makes you think, and I have had this thought, and I've seen similar things talked about online. I don't know if you've seen this too, but because of those chats, it's been speculated that cult-ish style members could be in these intelligence agencies in these private chats. Like, who knows what they're doing in their daily lives? Who knows what they, I mean, are they really allegiant to the United States, or would they be more allegiant to a group like Ziz or Antifa?
This turns into a chicken and the egg style conversation a lot, because there's a few different forms of thinking on this. The most obvious one that I think I've heard repeat the most is that people that are doing things that are illegal tend to try, or just doing things on the fringe of what's acceptable, try to get into places of power so that they can normalize the things that they are doing, so that in the case that they do get prosecuted or like looked into for it, they can either be above it, or they can change the law or change society in a way that they're no longer seen as this weird person doing a weird thing. So there's a direct incentive, if you were a cult member, to join an intelligence network. But on the exact other side of that token, historically, I mean, going back centuries, you can see intelligence networks infiltrating cults and secret societies because they do keep secrets. And that's one aspect, is like, you want people that can keep secrets, but also they have this covert means of communication, and they are dealing with these factions of society that typically do not present themselves or even become accessible to the outside world unless you're in these tiny little niche groups. So there's a incentive on both sides. If I'm in a cult, I want to get into the intelligence agency so I can get the power to like abuse that power. And on the other end, if I'm in the intelligence agency, I want to get into the cult, because now that's like building your thesis. That's basically you, if you were a DEA agent, this is you going undercover and making like this huge bust with the cartel and hundreds of people and hundreds of tons of stuff confiscated. That's the version of infiltrating a cult or infiltrating one of these extreme factions, is that becomes a career case for you.
100%. And who's to say that it's not happening both ways, right? It just, and who knows, we don't know, but it does seem that there's an element of that. I mean, and who would have guessed a couple of years ago that the CIA and NSA would be exposed for having kink chats where transgender and other individuals with extremist ideologies are like,
rhetorical, but I'd say Alex Jones probably. He'd be like, I called it.
Yeah, he did. I mean, and then when you see groups like Ziz, it's not going to be the only one, and it's probably not the only one currently either, which either A, means that they were probably working with other groups. Again, like I said, Antifa probably. And what other networks exist that we just haven't discovered yet? Like Ophelia was a German citizen here on a visa, and there's a Antifa faction inside of Germany as well. Just, I don't know. It could just be this. It could just be Ziz and their merry band of people, their 10 deep cult. Could just be that, or it could be a lot deeper, and there could be a lot more connections we just haven't seen yet.
Well, even if it is limited to just those 10, and this is my tinfoil hat firmly on my head, but this is where intelligence agency, and I'm just going to say FBI for now, because I mean, technically they were in Canada, maybe that's internet. Usually FBI is most of this domestic terrorism type stuff, that they see, wow, those 10 people sure did get a lot of traction. I wonder if that's an archetype we can model after, because now if you have and I'm going to make some sweeping rationalizations here, that maybe Ziz has some kind of mental issues, and maybe they are not as rational as they would think themselves to be. Well, now imagine the force and the resources of the state saying, okay, we're going to put 2,000 people on a task force, and all you have to do is make a better version of this Zizian cult with 10 to 20 people that can play the role, but also understand negotiation tactics and hand-to-hand combat and like all of the different like sort of strategies and skills that you would be taught as becoming part of one of these intelligence agencies. Now put those people in that same exact role, they can get way more mileage out of it, and they might be able to get beyond. So if there's a raid, instead of acting dead on the couch, you just flash a badge, or they bring you off into a back room and you're like, look, I'm part of this thing. This is out of your jurisdiction. Now all of a sudden you get way more mileage out of that. So my brain would go to think, what would be like, never let a good tragedy go to waste. I think that's an Eric Holden quote. Someone at the state said it. So how would you not let this tragedy go to waste? If you were sitting back and you're an alphabet agency and you're like, okay, here's a Zizian cult, how do you make that work for you? You know? And I feel that there is a non-zero portion of the government that has had this conversation. How do we make the Zizian cult thing work for us?
Well, I mean, and if you just think about, and again, I'm not trying to be offensive, I'm not trying to, whatever, but if you think about it, I mean, a transgender cult, members of this cult, they make pretty good spies. They're already convinced that they have to do the most rational thing and that surrender's not an option. They're transgender, so they have a different identity, than their legal identity. So they can change their identity. They can wear different clothing. It's almost, I mean, when you read some of the stuff they were doing, it almost seems like an espionage thing anyways, because it's like making them wear different clothing, training different parts of their brain, sleep depriving them. And, they can pretty much live on any environment, because it's not like they were living in like hotels or anything like that. They were living on boats and squatting in different places that they could find. They had to be pretty resourceful. And again, where did they get the firearms from? And they were comfortable using them. One of them got into a gunfight with a Border Patrol agent. It's not nothing. It's certainly not nothing. Whether you want to frame them and be like, oh, look, it's it's the scary transgenders, or actually this is a useful group. Like, I mean, I could see it either way. And that's why I'm always so fascinated by, like, how do these start? Like, it's never that interesting to me how people get into it, because it's so obvious. Like, time and time again, if you look at any cult, it becomes clear why people join them. I'm more fascinated by the leaders and how they're started and for what reasons they're started. The behavior stuff is what I'm most interested by.
See, I find it equally interesting, the individual members, because each person joining one of these cults probably has their own motivations for doing that. And you can probably figure out some kind of patterns. Whereas if you're looking at the cult leaders, you're limited to the patterns that they share with other cult leaders, and you can kind of figure out what it takes to be a cult leader. But in finding that out will help it so that you can recognize if you're being recruited or if you're finding interest in a thing that could be cultish, because you understand these hallmarks and patterns. But I think it's just as important to understand the motivations of all the individual people, because now you can relate to, like, oh, that would also be a motivator for me. And this is why jokingly sometimes I'll be like, okay, now let's rate, how likely are you to join this cult or the other? Because there are some that I really do recognize with. And I realize there's certain parts where in this one, it's like, okay, now you're going to change your identity. You're going to be Thomasina now. That might be like my line in the sand. And for like Heaven's Gate, it would be like all the way up to the castration. I'd be like, okay, I didn't see that fine print at the back of the pamphlet, but all the other stuff, I like applesauce. I like wearing Nikes. I like computers. So some of that stuff would line up for me. This one seems like it's a specific group, but it almost feels like the transgender aspect of this is more about Ziz, right? It's more about Ziz Lasota and not necessarily about the rationalist thing, which means that there could be other less extremist or like more normalized versions of the Ziz cult, and the Ziz cult was just the one that attracted all the wild cards, right? This was like the Suicide Squad of the rationalists.
Yeah, the Suicide Squad. That's a really good term for it. I like that.
Statistically, it seems appropriate.
Statistically, their numbers aren't great. I think you're right. That's why I think that time will tell. I bet you there are already groups that exist like this already that are not as extreme, but could be pushed that way. or what groups will be birthed out of this. Like this group has really made the headlines. Like lots of people are talking about it. It was all over Twitter for a good long while, and who knows what the trial is going to bring up. But it does seem that like these fringe ideas, like the rationalist society, you know what I mean? Like think about Sam Bankman-Fried. The dude was a billionaire. He scammed a bunch of people out of money. Now he's in prison, but he came from that same group. And that's just like a philosophy. Like the rationalists, that their group. I'm like looking at this thing, and I think I think their group might have been called Less Wrong. Like their specific group was called Less Wrong, but it was a movement of the rationalists. How many people, you know what I mean? It just goes to show, like, people that are already mentally unhinged, it doesn't take much to push them, no matter what philosophy it is, no matter what political ideology. Again, we were just talking about, like, look at the people burning Teslas and blowing them up. It's like the one that I think the thing that I think about too, and we've talked about this, is like the students who were overthrowing their campuses and were ideologically captured and through TikTok basically, and show up at their university to protest. And then when they're asked, like, well, hey, what are you protesting? And they're like, well, actually, I don't really know. And it's like, well, how do you get
You have to look at the sign that they were handed on the way to the protest and read it, and you're like, oh, that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Can you point Palestine out on a map for me? No? Okay. All right. Interesting. Can you point Ukraine out on a map? No? Okay. You're holding a sign that says Queers for Palestine, but do you know what they do to queer, gay people in Palestine? Are you aware of that? No? Oh, okay. Okay. Interesting. It's just like, it's nonsensical behavior that doesn't even make any sense. And that for me is something I'm really fascinated by, because I want to understand, how is it that that's happening? It's clearly influence. It's clearly an influence operation. Like, some people truly, genuinely believe what they're doing, and they're doing the things that they do, but how much of it is just being influenced by something else?
I mean, I haven't taken the tinfoil hat off yet, so I would say this is academia. This is the Department of Education. This is all state-backed education as a whole, that it's become insidious to one very specific type of. I'll say that it's like an on-ramp of ideologies, right? It's not like all of academia subscribes to one particular thing, but there
Right.
are people that have structured themselves and have created these hierarchies that, when a particular idea catches fire, it knows, like, they know where to pass it, who to give it to, who can like pass this baton to get the most traction the quickest amount of time. And once it starts becoming normalized in these small little elite groups, right, then all of a sudden the people that go through the classrooms with these people that are TAs or professors, they go on and they breed more and they become teachers. And then even if you're not preaching the exact ideology and the most extreme components of it, you're preaching sort of like the neutralized versions of this to, I don't know, third graders and fifth graders and seventh graders, and in a very Fabian society kind of way. If you understand that slow progression, you don't necessarily need to be an extremist, because an extremist is someone that goes from 0 to 60 in a way that everyone can see it. But if you do it so slow that, well, we're going to radicalize your grandkids, we're not going to radicalize you, we're going to get you so that you kind of disconnect from this odd behavior that your kids are exhibiting. And then if their kids do the same thing, well, now we're 2 generations removed. Now we can breed extremists that hate their grandparents for everything their grandparents stood for, just because they've got a different ideology that's kind of been instilled in them from the state. So that's kind of my way of thinking about all that.
Yeah, I can't disagree that especially since I've had similar thought processes, because it's like, but who's doing that? That's where I get to thinking about it, is like, if it really is that would take a lot of people to influence something like that. And it's like, well, who's doing it then? Like, and why would you? Like, what's the end goal? Like, what is it that you want from doing that, from making people extremist and doing all this stuff? Because you're not wrong. A lot of this is happening on college campuses. I've seen it. And to summarize some of this kind of behavior, I saw this clip that I think just does a really good job of encapsulating it. It was a clip of Cori Bush when she was still a senator or a congresswoman, one of the two. She was there advocating and talking about making billionaires pay their fair share in taxes. And so, there's a reporter there talking to Cori Bush, and the reporter says, "How much do you think billionaires, like how much do you think they should pay in taxes?" And Cori Bush says they should pay their fair share. And he's like, "Okay, but like how much what percentage is that? What percent is a fair share?" And Cori Bush goes, "Oh, do you think billionaires shouldn't pay their fair share?" And he's like, "No, that's not what I said. I'm asking you specifically how much, what percent of their taxes should they pay?" And then Cori Bush stops and thinks about it. She goes, "Well, if I have to pay 1/3 of my taxes, billionaires should too." And the reporter says, "They do. They do have to pay that much in taxes. So what percent? Are you saying that they should pay a different percent?" Completely flatlined. Like she had no idea what to say after that. And I truly, genuinely believe it's because she's an idiot and she didn't know that everybody pays the same taxes. Now, whether you want to make an argument that, billionaires find loopholes and whatever, fine, whatever. But that's not the argument. The argument is that everybody pays their taxes at the same bracket. There is a clearly defined way of people paying taxes. So when she was pushed even a little bit, this is the part that I think is relevant for a lot of people today. Whether it doesn't matter what political ideology you're on, doesn't matter what side you come from. I do think that there are critical elements of some people's beliefs that if you push them even just a little bit, it falls apart completely, because then they're like, I don't actually know. I'm not sure what I actually was thinking about that.
And that's usually met with, depending on how deep you are in your ideology, that could be met with a violent resistance. Like now you're going to spur anger of, how dare you make me rethink these extreme positions that I've taken that have affected my friends, family, career, whatever, right? Now you're almost turning that mirror on them. And a lot of people don't tend to like that. It's usually not a pleasant feeling. So it's met with a lot of resistance.
And it's so bizarre, because it wasn't always like that. I mean, people don't like being told they're wrong. But what other time in your life can you think of where things were so charged that, like, when you try to talk to somebody and have a debate and try to tell them, like, well, I'm not saying you're wrong. What do you believe? Can you tell me some facts about what you believe? And then bam, you can't. So then the instant reaction is you're a Nazi, bigot, fascist, racist. And it's like, that's the straw man fallacy. Arguments have to stand on their own merit. And anybody that's taken a class in philosophy on like how to debate, like how to have a rational conversation, arguments have to stand on their own merit, which means you can't just call the person making an argument an idiot. That has nothing to do with their argument. Does their claim, does their thing that they're saying have value and merit? Does that make sense? And if it doesn't, you attack that. You take that apart, but you have to do it with facts. Just calling somebody that makes an argument an idiot isn't winning an argument.
Well, I would argue a slightly different case, that calling someone an idiot, which is basically just an ad hominem attack, that's a rhetorical device. And if you understand how to use rhetoric to your advantage, first you survey the audience of, okay, who's around me? Because if you're debating someone, if you're about to call someone an idiot, it's unlikely that you're trying to change that person's mind. You're talking to anyone else with an earshot. So I know that if I'm in front of a very emotionally charged crowd that is already waiting to express their emotion in some way, I should call that person an idiot, because at this point, the audience is no longer capable of a higher level of thought. So if I try and dismantle them logically and break down all of, the grammar and the logic and stuff, no, if you're a very good orator, right? If you understand rhetoric, you're like, oh, if I just called this guy an idiot right now, I win. And that happens so often. Like you can see that in the presidential debates, even in like Trump's first run, how every single person he came up with like a nickname. Everyone got which was straight up ad hominem. But he read the room and he realized, oh, these people want to make fun of them. Like they want to see me bully them and make up names. And to do that is I would say the sign of a great philosopher / debater isn't not doing ad hominem. It's knowing when to do the ad hominem. It would be the same thing like two boxers. You're not, if like you're an idiot, you're just gonna throw like an uppercut. Every single punch is gonna be an uppercut, like you're playing Mortal Kombat or something against your friend. But if you see that opening, like hell yeah, throw that uppercut if they leave themselves open.
Yes, and you're correct. You're right. It's an ad hominem. That's the ad hominem fallacy. And I mean, you're not wrong, because it does work clearly for that point. I mean, this is the time we live in. It is all extreme, so it is easy to just Nazi, bigot, fascist your way into any argument.
Right. I mean, how many times have you even heard in real life, or at least seen online? But there's almost that phrase like, well, of course you'd say that. You voted for blank. Whoever the person is right. Also an ad hominem. But usually people will see that as the ultimate, like, oh my God, they just destroyed you. Oh, they just won that debate. And they did, because winning a debate or winning an argument doesn't necessarily mean you're right. It just means that you were able to get the consensus on your side. And if you can do that often enough, you learn, like, you don't, like, why be weighed down by the burden of bringing up facts and the burden of discounting someone? If you know how to use these logical fallacies and weaponize them, that's the true power. Like that, in my mind, that's politics. Politics is knowing every logical fallacy and when to employ them, even if you yourself don't believe in the merit of them. Like, they are effective. They've been around for thousands of years. And I mean, philosophers, even in ancient Greece, were getting into fatal, conflicts with each other over ideologies too. So I don't even know how much of an extremist thing it is. If anything, now with social media, you don't even have to read a book anymore. Like, it used to be, oh my God, the masses are going to become radicalized because they can all read and publish books. And now it's like a next iteration of that, of the people that don't even want to bother to read or write books. They can just have their thoughts or opinions known and broadcast in these like large scales. So they get the same type of reach without even having to do as much legwork. And now the AI aspect, I could almost create a radicalized AI and just have that AI pump out nonstop rhetorical, like emotionally charged stuff. Like, we could very likely in our lifetime see a cult or an extremist group that is created solely from AI prompts. Like, they didn't even get an actual cult leader. They just got some person that's sending out these crazy, like news chain emails, and then come to find out that it was ChatGPT behind it the whole time.
I didn't even think about that, but you're absolutely correct in that regard. AI gods that some people will take as their own. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, it's really strange. It's just a weird time to be alive. That's for sure.
The part that I find the most fascinating about this Zizian cult, is the Weekend at Bernie's aspect. It's a hilarious image, the hilarious visual. Like, I'll fight to the death, and then you just flop out on the couch, and they're like, "We know you're not dead," and they have to prop your head up to take the shot and everything. It's such a silly aspect of it. It's like the laziest version of sovereign citizen theory. Like, you don't even say, "I'm not driving, I'm traveling." The cop is like, knock, knock, knock. Hey, do you have license and registration? You just completely go flaccid, right? You just limp. It's what a toddler would do. This is a toddler throwing a tantrum.
100%. Yeah, I mean, and then to think that, like, that's the person who came up with this ideology, and then their members are actually dying in the process. Like, that's wild. Again, it reminds me of Manson. Manson sent his cronies out to do his bidding, but like, it's just such odd behavior, It's like, because to what end does it even serve? Like, what purpose are they fulfilling by doing some of the things they were doing? Now, some of it was certainly situational, like the person's property that they were squatting on. That guy wanted to remove them, so they had tried to kill him. And then the Border Patrol agent was, I'm assuming, trying to stop them because they had firearms in the car, and then that led to a gun battle. So those situations certainly seem like it was more of a means to survive. And it doesn't appear like they were just making like a hit list of people to go try and kill. It was situational, but nevertheless, it's still dangerous because of what they believe. It's like, okay, are you just going to fucking kill a cop because you get pulled over? Or like, I don't know.
Well, these are ideological opponents to them, right? Landlord, being a landlord at all is kind of seen as you might as well be, Satan himself, to like the Antifa crowd. And Satan might not even be the right analogy here, right? Because usually if you're advocating sharing space in your brain with two different identities, two different genders, embracing like the androgynous aspect of that almost feels like a Satan, and I don't mean this in a religious way. I mean in a
I know what you mean.
ideological Luciferian / satanic way of like worshiping Baphomet, not because of child sacrifice and blood worship, but worshiping Baphomet in that it embraces this androgynous blendings of the sacred male and the sacred feminine, and that you're somehow elevating beyond the normal consensus of society, right? Because you've embraced this sort of like far out concept. It kind of feels that you can throw that satanic angle at this same particular group because of that one particular aspect of the ideology.
Well, I mean, and who's to say that it didn't come from that? I'm not convinced. I still haven't seen enough evidence yet. There's not enough about Lesoto's early life, but I wouldn't be surprised if in their youth there were some elements of like, and again, I'm not saying that they were in like a satanic cult or anything like that, but like maybe they were like an edgy teenager who believed in Satanism, and so like maybe that's where some of these ideas came from. Then because what I have seen in the past, okay, this is just my opinion, but what I have seen is it does appear that people who traditionally grew up in like religious, and I'm just going to say like Christian backgrounds, they grow up and they feel betrayed by it. They don't like it. And so then they leave it. And then in place of it, they search for philosophies. And that's how you end up becoming, looking and finding something like rationalism or, becoming like oh God, what's that guy's name? Sam something. He was the guy that used to go on Jordan Peterson's podcast all the time. He's an atheist, kind of Buddhist, but he runs a podcast.
Oh, I'm drawing a blank right
God,
now.
yeah. Anyways, I mean,
Russell Brand?
No, not Russell Brand. He's the guy that said that he didn't care if Hunter Biden had a garage full of dead babies or something like that.
Oh, right.
You know what I'm talking about?
I don't know the name. I remember the quote.
Oh, I think it's Sam Harris. People listening can look it up for themselves, but he really did say that. He's fucking, that's batshit. He's an atheist / Buddhist who talks about like spirituality and stuff like that, but at the same time also doesn't believe in a God. I think that it makes sense why people who have an upbringing in religion then find themselves looking for a new home, and then it shouldn't be surprising that they would land into something like Satanism or this other philosophy that branches out. And it's an attempt to find something and replace something that they grew up with, because they need to have something they can't, it's just like a place filler. And if you're already in the mind space to accept something new, then any philosophy will do as long as it meets whatever criteria you're looking for. I think that's
the Zizian criteria almost seems like for the members, it was about lashing out at authority figures because there's a dead landlord, there's a dead border security guard, and I believe one of the other victims were the parents of a member, which about as close as you can get to like the direct authority figure. So maybe they're all just working through mommy and daddy issues in various levels.
Yeah, a rejection of authority. I would like to know more about Ziz Lesoto's upbringing. I would like to get to the details of that. I would really like to interview Ziz Lesota and get into some of the details of that person's life because I want to know what's going on there. But I just wouldn't be surprised, specifically for Ziz Lesota. I would not be surprised if there was some kind of religious upbringing that led them astray, and then they felt estranged from their family, and then went down a path of like learning about these different philosophies or something to that effect.
That could be a very frustrating interview. It's where you sit down and you're like, Ziz, I know you're alive. Like, Ziz, I know you're not dead. Come on, answer the question.
Yeah. Stop pretending. I know you're alive. Yeah, I mean, but for them, I mean, in their philosophy, they would have something to gain because they would be getting some kind of attention from being asked questions, and then they could justify their actions.
Or yeah, or start looking for new members. Again, Heaven's Gate is still an active group. I think that maybe you literally missed the bus, right? Like they missed
Ha!
the comment, but you can still join Heaven's Gate. I don't know about People's Temple. I don't think you can still go to Guyana if you
I
wanted
don't
to.
think so. No, I
But
don't think so. Not
there's a few cults that even after they come and they go, they remain active. This seems like one that without Ziz themselves, like this is a cult of personality. Like if you got recruited by Ziz directly, but it doesn't seem like the tenets of this cult's belief is strong enough to recruit on its own, right? You just say, we believe in this Nuremberg style retroactive punishment of all meat eaters. I'm sure you can get some people on board on that, but
yeah.
not everyone's going to turn into a mall ninja and try and stab a landlord with a samurai sword.
I don't think so. Yeah, but I do think, again, like I said, before, I would not be surprised if there were connections to Antifa, because this kind of stuff, like when you really dig into the true nature of Antifa, like this is the kind of stuff that you see in Antifa. There's quite a bit of mental illness involved with Antifa, but then there are people ideologically like similar to these beliefs that you see in the Zizian cult.
It seems also a notoriously hard group to corral. Like even if you were at least dealing with right-wing extremist or militia members, you can rally around, say, like a Second Amendment or some sort of documentation where it's like, hey, even if we're not all on the same page on everything, we're all on this page. When it comes to Antifa or these anarchist groups, it almost seems that the only thing that they share in common is not liking any sort of structure or rules, which makes it very hard in order to come to any kind of consensus. Even when you see these Antifa-led groups, they start to deteriorate once one person learns how to game the system. Once one person doesn't do the mic check or doesn't pass the baton and let the next person get a voice, if someone doesn't stand up for that and sort of like cut them down, then it actually forms a hierarchy, and having a hierarchy is like the antithesis of what they're supposed to stand for. So at some point, like they have to do the exact thing that they're fighting against. And this seems very specific to this like Antifa / anarchist sort of ideology. Other ideologies, they play by the books. Like they actually embrace hierarchies.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and I think that kind of summarizes left-wing ideology altogether. Let me clarify: extremist left-wing ideology, and it makes complete sense why they fall apart, why they kind of like, it's like all or nothing. But then it's like even within like political landscapes, like if you're not extremist enough, like you start leaving people behind. I read this post the other day from Reddit where it was this person saying like that they were looking for a left-wing group, and that they keep finding groups that they like, but then they keep leaving the group because the groups are too extreme. And if they say this thing wrong, or if they do one thing wrong, they're harshly criticized. And so they can't find a group that they like. And so, of course, as you could imagine in the comment section, it's like, maybe that's the problem. Duh. Like if your group is so extreme that you can't ever do anything right, and that the only answer is to continually up the ante of extremism, like where do you go from there?
This is another, I think, fascinating aspect of cult mentality that, and if you look at any religion in history too, like technically they all kind of start as cults until they get big enough to become tax exempt. But usually the earlier are you on, so if you've got a group of 10 people, every single one of those 10 people has to be a zealot. You can't be a lukewarm initiate of a brand new religion or a brand new political group and just kind of be, like a fair weather about it. You have to actually be balls to the wall extremist, because otherwise the group itself fizzles out. It can only survive with pure zealots, and you get all the pros and cons with that. And it takes, I don't even know what the requirement is in terms of like length or size, but at a certain point, once you've got just nonstop zealots all professing something, then you'll eventually start to get normies, and then you can polish off the rough edges. And most of the time they will kick out those original zealots that created the religion or the cult to begin with, because now they are so extreme that they're going to start sort of rejecting or de-incentivizing the masses of normies that want to join. So they'll get kicked out, or they'll be put into positions where they don't interact with the outside world as much because they can't have that sort of influence. But it's weird. Like, it's almost the same as a small startup company that gets bought by a larger corporation. And now it's like you got to fire off all the people that were there to create it, because the corporation doesn't want these entrepreneurial mindsets of these like people that are constantly like, let's disrupt the industry. It's like, wait a minute, the industry just bought you. Like, you can't disrupt us. We own you now. And I feel that the same exact thing happens with cults and religions. It gets to that certain size and they got to fire all the founders.
That's right. Yeah, and then if they don't, you get like the Rashnishis in that were in Oregon, right? Like
Right,
Osho.
great example.
Yeah, like look what happened when they didn't. They just kept taking more and more and more people, and people kept getting more and more and more extreme until the whole thing exploded. And then you got some rogue member trying to poison the fucking people in the village, in the town next to them. And then you have to start, you're getting into gunfights on the border. So now you got to arm your people. And it's like, you went from being like a commune of hippies to like a fucking prison camp,
They could have done it. I think they just had the time period wrong. If that particular cult had tried to do the same thing 100 years prior, it might have had more traction. But because it was happening in the 80s and 90s, there was just too much, I think, media coverage, and there was too much public ridicule that then gets spread, and then they sort of like lose a lot of that. Like, imagine, like, could the Mormons have created their entire religion if they started in the 1980s as opposed to like the 1780s?
Yeah. I feel that, but I mean, it's like, isn't it a telltale sign though of all of these groups that like inevitably it's just doomed to fail? I mean, like the Rajneeshi is like, it did start out really good. Like if you watch that documentary Wild Wild Heart on Netflix, I mean, Osho, for what it's worth, I've read some of his books, and some of his ideas are pretty good. I actually have, found some things that he said interesting. And the stuff that happened, I don't think necessarily was a result of him, but as a result of people in his group just kind of falling apart and going nuts. But again, like, what could you have done differently? Like, I don't know, could you have just done that in the middle of nowhere where there wasn't a nearby town to interfere with you? I don't know. I mean, it seemed like what became the problem was that they just allowed everybody to come out there, and then they started getting some mentally ill individuals and some prisoners, convicts, people getting out of prison. And it seemed like those groups of people were the ones that kind of started making things more on the extreme side. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
In the case of Osho, it was like his direct, not advisor, but like his assistant, like the lady that was running it. What he could have done was probably like, the first time you're driving back onto your compound and you notice there's a bunch of armed guards with AK-47s.
Yeah.
Hey guys, let's lose the gun. Let's soften up a little bit. We're big enough now that we don't need to project that particular image. That could have been something you did, and I feel that, and I think I've seen that documentary. But the criticism would be that Osho couldn't just continuously be detached from the things that were happening directly in support of him. Like, he had to actually come out and say, stop doing this. But in effect, I think he also realized that like that was his main supporter base. And you start criticizing the zealots, right? It's not necessarily Osho that's getting everyone to sign up. It's Osho and the zealots. So now if Osho splinters from the zealots, well, now that's how factions start. This is how denominations and religions start. Because now you got 3 zealots will join their own thing, and Osho's his own thing. And I think as a way to avoid that particular type of conflict, he just kind of played along until it became way out of his hands.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and if you think about, had the Zizians not been caught, I think that this is exactly what it would have turned into. Like, their group wasn't that big. So I think it really would have only been a matter of time before something like that would have inevitably happened. I mean, and maybe that's exactly, if you think about it, I mean, they killed the landlord, they killed a border patrol agent, they were actively doing things that were too extreme that they could, not handle. that inevitably either got their members killed or incarcerated. And so, I don't know.
I mean,
I
it
think,
seems entirely reasonable that that the Zizian cult, in quotes, that was just a faction of a slightly larger ideology that was so specific. Like, you can rinse and repeat this group of 10 people over and over again, probably
yes.
another 10 times, and they would eat. And it's convenient that they don't really call themselves anything and they don't have a bigger name, because they were just the test faction. That was sort of the trial that got sent out into the world. And maybe someone's revising and refining what iteration 2 of this might be.
Well, I mean, it'll be telling if that is the case. It would be telling because we'll see another one. I mean, again, this feels like a branch of Antifa. Like, this is the same kind of people, the crunchy vegan types that are willing to fucking arm themselves and firebomb shit. Like, I would put money that we will see another version of this in the near future.
All right, well, I'll keep my eye out for it. I know you will too. What else you got on the horizon, man? Like, you've been talking behind the scenes to me about looking into some of the satanic panic and SRA type stuff. Is that a rabbit hole that you're starting to go down now?
Yes. I don't know what that looks like. I'm still in like the research phase of it, but I am interested in people who claim to be survivors of satanic ritual abuse. The stories are extreme, and so it's hard to know. You know what I mean? Like, you and I have discussed is like, why, would somebody lie about that? And if they're not lying, then that means that there is some seriously horrible things happening behind the scenes. And so I think it's worthy of investigating and looking into. I don't know what it'll lead to, but in the current thing that I'm doing now, I'm still working on research, and my current research is working on like the behavior of trolling and how it's tied to antisocial behavior. And, I don't know if I've talked to you about this specifically or not, but like, the way that we define it is not trolling. Like, lots of people troll, like, you can comment on somebody's Twitter post and piss them off, and you could consider that trolling. We're more talking about people who are on the extreme end of this, where they're like this. They do this every day. They're chronically online shit posting or, commenting on people's things just to piss them off and get them mad. I just read an article, a peer-reviewed article not too long ago, talking about there are people who will call helplines, like an Amazon helpline, because a lot of companies' policies for customer support is that you can't hang up the phone until the call is over, unless they're threatening you and like it gets verbally abusive, then you can hang up. But as long as it's not stepping over those boundaries of being verbally abusive or threatening, you can't hang up the phone until the call is satisfied and over with. So some of these people that are like extreme trolls, they will keep people on the phone for hours just fucking with them because it's funny, because they're sadistic. And so this is tied to dark personality traits, which is one of the things I'm interested in.
Another technique from Scientology, I think, is called bull baiting. And it's essentially the same premise of knowing how to evoke violent responses, how to work someone up to the point where they do something that now makes it so either you can hang up the phone on them, or you can call the authorities, or
yes,
you can now prove that, oh, you are clearly a violent person now because they were able to antagonize you over this long period of time. There's also, in my days as a game developer, when you get deep into game theory, outside of just like the philosophical, but like actual video game theory, there is a very specific class of player called the griefer, and that they derive their enjoyment from just simply griefing other people. The most basic premise, and this doesn't mean that you have to be born a broken person or that you've got a chip on your shoulder. Griefing for a lot of people might start out when kids realize they have way more fun camping out at like a spawn point and just taking people out in a game as soon as they spawn, which isn't really in the nature of the game, right? It's sort of this weird workaround. They found an exploit, and they know how like exploitative this is. the same thing. I mean, when I was growing up, it was the people that realized in Street Fighter 2, you could just keep sweeping the leg over and over again, and they could never get a single combo off, and it becomes its own strategy. But part of it is like reveling in the frustration you're causing this other person, knowing that you found a loophole that they can't also engage with. And that becomes, again, you don't have to be broken to be like, why is it that I find it more fun to just keep sweeping the leg and seeing this person gets frustrated than actually playing the game and learning how to beat them on merit? And then it becomes a rationalization, which I think is where like the philosophy and all of the like the zealousness comes in, where once you can rationalize, well, I'm not doing this. Clearly the game designers made it so you can do this. Therefore, I'm doing the most rational thing possible by exploiting this little loophole. Everyone should be exploiting this loophole. That's how you really play the game. And once you can rationalize it to yourself, now you have no qualms doing that forever. And that's slowly how that griefer mentality kind of builds up. Well, the game was made this way. And then you can extrapolate that to, well, that's how reality works. That's how God made me, or that's how, you know, the way that like just human nature is. So why not exploit that over and over again?
100%. And griefing is actually in our definition. So, and I don't know how much time you have, so I don't want to burn up all your time, but I can get into like a little bit of the research that we're doing. We're in phase 2. Phase 1 was actually creating a new assessment to measure trolling, because currently in the current literature, there's only one real assessment that all of the research uses, and it's called the GATE, GAIT, Global Assessment of Internet Trolling. But it's only 4 questions. It's a 4-question assessment, and only one of the questions pertains to gaming. So it's just not a good measurement.
What are the 4 questions?
Oh God, I'd have to pull them up, but you can look it up.
Let's save that. This actually sounds like a fascinating topic for another show. As we can assess ourselves in the audience. Are you a troll?
Oh, and if they are, I'd love to talk to them, because I need to get some more details about that. Yeah, but I'd love to come back and talk about this, because I've done quite a bit. I've talked about it in my book. Phase 2 of my research just got approved at my university, and so we're getting ready to launch that too.
Oh, congratulations, man. No, that actually sounds like a perfect launching off point for the next one. So I guess let people know where they can find you and your works and what your book's called and where to go and buy your book and all the things.
Yeah, man. My book is What's Under the Mask, and you can find it at Amazon. I also have a podcast called What's Under the Mask, and you can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts. If you want to get in contact with me, or if you're interested in talking to me about anything, you can find me on X. X is where I do most of my stuff these days. And you can find my handle at Cameron Harman 91. And yeah, I'm there. You feel free to message me or hit me up if you've got questions about some of the work I'm doing.
I appreciate your time as always, man. And I've got a busy day of shit posting to get back to, so I need to go and grief these kids.
Yes, absolutely.
Ready for a cosmic conspiracy about Stanley Kubrick, moon landings, and the CIA? Go visit nasacomic.com.
nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com. Oh, nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
Never a Straight Answer is a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the Apollo space missions.
Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
This is the perfect read for comic, Kubrick, or conspiracy fans of all ages. For more details, visit nasacomic.com.
Paranoid. Yo. scribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain, give you the flight? My plane paper, the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel when it's real to real. You will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the Lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hate maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be all the blunt smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Matters not in the least bit. We get heavy rotate when the beat hits, so thank us, you're welcome. Fuck the niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still,